欢迎收看《家国纵横》，我是鲍英。气候变化的冲击成为短期和长期的最高风险之一。北极变暖也增加了全球极端天气事件发生的概率。欧洲冬天气温创新高，恍如夏天。极端天气导致农田失收，造成的粮食危机严重冲击发展中国家。研究发现，湖面结冰程度逐年下降，意味着气候变化已影响到极北部社区的道路运输及户外活动。究竟冬季气温变暖对社区的安全威胁有多严重？
北国的冬天原来应该是冰天雪地，不同国家、不同民族在冰雪中热闹欢腾的过年。如今冰雪日子缩短了，所带来的隐忧绝对不能轻视。
Our data set from Japan actually starts from 1443. And so we can document how climate has changed before the Industrial Revolution and how human impacts have changed the climate through examining lake ice. And in Asia, one of the longest ice records that I work with is from Lake Suwa in Japan. And it's been maintained, and it still is, by 15 generations of Shinto priests. And they record that the date that the lake ice forms. And that's because it's very important to the Shinto religion. We also know in China that ice is very important. So the first fish that's caught in ice fishing is auspicious and very important to the community, as well as ice festivals. So some of the largest ice festivals that happen in the world happen in China. So ice really brings together communities in the winter, not only in Canada, but all around the world.
极北，尤其是冰雪社区的内外运输，很依赖冰路至少1公尺厚。Sharma 教授的研究团队发现，全球气温每上升摄氏1.5度，道路可通行的安全天数便下降90%，上升2度，安全度便下降95%，上升3度便下降99%。同样，如果要依靠冰雪进行户外娱乐活动，每上升1.5度，安全可游玩的日子便减少13天，2度便减少17天，3度便减少24天。因为要承受一个人的重量，冰雪起码要有10厘米的厚度。
Climate change is actually affecting northern regions a lot more, where temperatures are warming a lot faster than in southern regions. So they're experiencing the impacts of climate change much more drastically. So we did this global study looking at how many people fall through the ice and drown, and we found that in northern Canada, they had the highest drowning rates per capita because there's a strong reliance on ice. You need people travel by snowmobiles or on snow trails. So ice fishing and hunting is a very important part of their culture, and it's contributing to more fatalities, unfortunately.
达沃斯论坛是一个年度世界经济论坛。近50年来，每年1月份，世界领袖、大企业的主管、不少名流明星会集齐在瑞士一个小镇达沃斯，出席这个经济论坛，参加不同的会议，讨论不同的议题，试图改善世界的现状。约克大学的 Sharma 教授也做了一项研究，与气候变化有密切的关系。
So what we're finding is that there's less ice in the winter across the northern hemisphere. So we have later ice on dates, earlier ice off, shorter ice duration, and even declining ice thickness. And the reason why this is important, it's because ice is really important to maintain water quality, freshwater availability, and freshwater quality. So if you have less ice, you can think of ice as like a lid on a lake in winter. If you lift that lid early, what you end up having is more evaporation. So more of our fresh water, we have less of it because it's evaporating. The other thing that happens is that when you lift that lid early, the water temperatures warm earlier, they warm warmer, you have more algal production in the lakes, and that can sometimes lead to poor water quality and algal blooms. So ice sort of maintains what's happening in lakes, not only in the winter, but through the whole year. When you have ice, it sort of slows down the lake ecosystem processes. So it slows down life, it slows down what animals might, they need less energy, they need less food, and it acts like a reset button on a lake. We've noticed that there's less ice, and so there's less time for people to use the ice safely. And what we've seen is that ice fishing tournaments are increasingly canceled because the ice isn't thick enough for people to go ice fishing, ice skating competition. So in Sweden, so actually in Europe, so this ice skating race started in the 1700s in the Netherlands. And because of climate change, it's increasingly moving to more northern countries. And so now this skating race is in Sweden, but in some winters it's too warm for the skating race to take place. So this project was a collaboration with researchers from Wales, from South Korea, and from China. And the reason that we all worked together for this project was because we all brought different skills and expertise to the project. And so, I work on the impacts of climate change on lakes by collecting large data sets. We had a collaborator who works with remote sensing and world data collected from satellites. Our collaborators are from Busan in South Korea and Beijing in China. And then our Chinese and South Korean collaborators have these amazing skills and access to supercomputers that can analyze large amounts of data. So in this project, we analyzed 38 billion data points for every grid cell on the planet from 1850 to 2100 under different climate change models. And without our collaborations in China and South Korea, this research would not have been possible.
与1971年第一次达沃斯论坛相比，现在达沃斯的雪量已减少40%以上。本届论坛开幕前夕便发布了2023年全球风险报告，郑重指出气候变化的冲击是短期和长期的最高风险之一。
Lake ice is predominantly affected by warming climates. And so the only real solution to preserving lake ice cover is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And that takes global cooperation and effort to come together to develop cleaner technologies, to implement policies that will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and that with those changes, we'll see actually extreme benefits to environment here in Canada, but everywhere.
报告将自然灾害与极端天气事件列为未来2年世界面临的第2大风险，而在未来10年的最大风险便是应对气候变化不利。
What does it take for politicians here and in wealthier countries to care about people who going through the impacts of climate change already? So I think we need a little bit more empathy as well from our leaders to care about how other people are affected by our actions.
北极的变暖速度是全球平均速度的4倍，北极变暖增加了全球极端天气事件发生的概率。
What happens in the Arctic or any place in the world, it's not contained to that region. It has these global impacts. So the melting glaciers, the melting sea ice, that all contributes to changing water levels in the sea, and changing atmospheric circulation patterns that affects climate here in Toronto, but also elsewhere. Climate change is a global phenomena, so it's not whatever happens in the north or whatever particular region you're in, it's not contained there.
2023年元旦前后，欧洲多国的冬季气温均创新高，多地气温突破摄氏20度，恍如夏季。而大西洋彼岸的美国却经历了极度寒潮，随后加州出现了洪灾，至少19人死亡。总统拜登宣布该州进入紧急状态。
The goal of this project has been achieved. That goal was to understand the impacts of climate change on safe ice thickness. But now we've recently received a grant from ArcticNet to actually expand our project to looking at lake ice, snow cover, and sea ice, and to see how climate change is affecting all three components and what that means for transportation to Arctic communities and remote communities. So what we're going to do is identify areas where, marine shipping is going to increase because of less sea ice and climate change. But the road infrastructure is going to be less stable and there's going to be a shorter road season. So how do remote communities get access to food, to fuel, to medicine in the winter months? And that's what we're hoping to study over the next 2 years.
更令世人担忧的是，这些因素极有可能形成一股压力，除了冲击着发达国家，对脆弱的发展中国家更会形成不可估量的伤害。受害的是世上绝大多数人口和我们的下一代。
We see young people every week protesting to save our planet and do something about climate change. And does anyone really care? Not really. Like Canada's emissions are increasing so rapidly. Sometimes we might say that, climate change is happening, it's affecting people, but we don't really change our policies. We don't decrease our greenhouse gas emissions here. And I think the big problem is that the people who are going to be impacted by climate change are not necessarily the people who live in the rich countries. So it's people who live in Southeast Asia, people who live in Africa, and in South America. They're the ones who are already experiencing the negative impacts of climate change.
达沃斯论坛部分与会代表更称，要避免科学家所预言的最坏后果，相信最重要的就是钱。
But there's also motivation and the desire to bring in some change and to say that our planet is important to us, it's important to our future generations, it's important to our kids and our grandkids. And if we don't do something about it now and we don't have a shift in ideology and how much greenhouse gas emissions that we emit, our children and our grandchildren are not going to have a great future.
以上是本期节目内容。如果您想重温节目，您可以登录城市电视网站，点击节目重温中的家国纵横。我是鲍英，我们下次再见。